Hey everyone, hey everyone. Uh, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about a wiki from a medical side. So I'm a emergency physician at UT Health, the Science Center up in the Med Center. I work for Memorial Hermann, and I work in their residency. So we teach residents on a daily basis how to become emergency medicine doctors. And we've used a wiki for a long time, and this is going to come at it from a little bit of different perspective, because although medicine is indeed part of sort of enterprise technologies, we are a public-facing wiki, so we are not behind any firewalls. We don't contain any proprietary information, but we are sort of highly geared towards education, continuing medical education, and bedside referencing for physicians who are treating patients so that they have access to the information that they should have when considering a particular disease, and more importantly, so when they're making life and death situations, they have easy access to information that will allow them to make a quick decision and hopefully a correct decision. So there's a lot of stakes that are sort of on the line with the information that we have on our wiki. And it's also important for us to be able to reach our users wherever they're accessing this wiki. So whether they're in the field in Uganda, in a MASH tent, or whether they're in an emergency room that's shielded from cellular service next to an MRI scanner, and they need to use the wiki offline. We sort of have a lot of services built into our wiki through both mobile applications as well as just the normal front-facing MediaWiki install. But so that's just a little sort of background in terms of WikiM. I just head up software development there, and my day job is a ER doc. But I'm going to talk particularly about how we organize data on the wiki to sort of decrease redundancy so that we sort of centralize particular topics that are important. We decrease data duplication. And then I'll talk a little bit about some more interesting templates that we've designed that allowed us to sort of push out information quickly and sort of effectively for the docs who use the wiki on a daily basis. I don't have any financial benefits from anything at WikiM. If anything, I probably lose money working on it. So these are sort of three core principles we'll talk about. Reusable data. This is going to talk about centralizing the data within templates to decrease data duplication, which will hopefully increase data reliability, which will allow for abstracting some of the complexity of various parts of the wiki into central areas where very technical users can work on them, and allowing sort of the more casual users and editors to just focus on particular areas of content that they're easy to edit so they don't have to see a lot of the technical aspects taking place behind the scenes. And then we'll talk a little bit about community culture. It's sort of a central theme here, but sort of how that can be built into the community early on, onboarding new users so they make use of templates and they make use of proper data organization techniques early so there's not a lot of effort to go redo duplications later. I'm going to go through two cases. I think it's probably best to learn from example. So we're going to talk about two sort of cases, and hopefully you can sort of abstract the core concepts to go back to your enterprise to be able to think about how you could organize data into sort of groups on the wiki so you decrease duplication. So we'll talk about the first one, which is very simple. This is how we organize antibiotics on our wiki so that we don't have multiple dosing regimens, multiple duplicated treatment protocols on various pages, so that we've centralized them into one particular place. So changing an antibiotic dosing for a particular disease is changed everywhere that it's appropriate. And we'll talk about another quick reference that we've done. These are just some screenshots from some of the sort of the mobile versions of the site, but also they're sort of visible on the web as well. We'll have some links so you guys can follow along with your laptop later. But these are an area where we allow for quick critical care referencing. So in a life and death situation, if you're taking care of a patient and you need to sort of step back and think about something or reference very quickly an equipment dosing or equipment sizing, this is where you would go to do that on our wiki. And this we've been able to create this very quickly using some variables and templates so that we can decrease the amount of edits that need to take place to sort of push updates after new guidelines come out. So the first thing, if everyone's not familiar with templates, this is probably, I'm not familiar with some of the other wiki installs, but from a semantic or from a MediaWiki standpoint, templates are, I think, probably one of the best concepts to learn early on to allow for sort of effective data organization. The curly brackets are what define a template on a wiki page. And if you're not familiar with the concept, think of it as something that is embedded in something else. A template is just an area on the wiki. It exists as its own page, and you can embed that page in another page. So if I change something on the original template, every page that has that template embedded in it is going to have the data changed on it. So I change in one place and I read in many places. And this sort of decreases data duplication. So for example, if we're looking at antibiotics to treat eye infections, we're going to display a list of all possible diagnoses and antibiotic regimens, and they're going to differ based on disease. But the orbital cellulitis, which is just a cellulitis and infection around your eye, those antibiotics are going to be displayed in one page as a template, but yet visible on a main page for antibiotics. Corneal abrasion, so you scratch your eye, taking out your contact, that particular treatment antibiotic regimen is also going to have its own page, but be able to be embedded into multiple other pages where it would be useful for a physician to consider that in part of their differential diagnosis. And so that when someone changes the guidelines, when the ophthalmology associations update their guidelines, rather than us having to change it on every place in the wiki, we change it in one place, and it's read in many places that it's referenced. So we'll talk sort of through some of the technical aspects because I think it will drive home the point. So this big list, which is displayed on many pages on the wiki because we want users to be able to access these lists very quickly, this is simply just a navigational template. It's just a set of bullets, and those set of bullets can be embedded on any page where we think that users would want to quickly access that list. So we change one sort of aspect of that list or add in a whole new section of antibiotics. Say we're going to expand for cancer treatment regimens on here as well. It wouldn't make much sense, but if we were going to add a new sort of category of antibiotic treatments, we could have every sort of page that uses that template list have that category added to it immediately. Drilling down even further, if we were to sort of click on eye antibiotics, you'd sort of get these lists like this. And all these listings of various regimens have their own particular centralized page where they're organized. So if you're working for oil rig parts, so you would be able to have particular groupings of parts that needed to be updated or changed. You could sort of abstract them into their own page, and you could then change those in one section, having them be updated on everywhere else in the wiki where they're referenced. And this is important because if you're going to try to sell a wiki to a corporate entity, sell it to one of your bosses as an idea that's useful, if there's data duplication and there's errors in other parts of the data that are duplicated, it's going to be a very hard sell when you have some parts of the wiki that are reliable and other parts that are not. So this is probably one of the easiest ways to increase the reliability as you're trying to get buy-in from other users and other members of the organization. By increasing the reliability, you increase its adoption rate, and by decreasing the amount of data that's duplicated across pages, you're going to increase the speed at which users can easily change data. So what we've done is we've centralized all the antibiotics on the entire wiki. We allow sort of diagnostic specific templates to exist and be embedded on various pages. And I've sort of driven this home enough. It minimizes error, and it reduces the amount of effort needed to change pages on the wiki. In order for this to happen, it took a lot of work sort of developing the community culture of centralization. Fortunately, we had a sort of small dedicated team of about 30 to 40 docs initially that were on board with this idea. And for all new users, they had to start on day one to understand when they're writing information, it's important to see if that information exists elsewhere. And that's not very easy with any of these information systems, and so it requires mentorship, I think, is sort of one of the points that hasn't necessarily been stressed enough here. So the way our wiki, since it's a public-facing wiki that's really adopted by a lot of academic institutions, is within those academic institutions there are users of our wiki, and those users mentor other users who onboard onto the system. So when we see a new user register on our wiki, we know where they're from because they have to insert their credentials, they have to declare their affiliation with their community hospital or their academic hospital. And we pay a lot of attention to those new users. And we pay actually probably more attention to them than we do sort of the experienced users because we want to connect them with other users in their organization who they don't know are registered on the wiki. That's probably easier within the corporate culture, but you may have satellite organizations and offices, and when you see users are working from a satellite location, maybe you should get them in contact with the other organization members editors who are working in their office. So similarly, we make sure that within academic institutions, they're working with other editors within that same institution. And we first send them we send them a sort of an onboarding email similar to how Darren had mentioned within the NASA Wiki. But more importantly, once they start editing, we send them feedback. Positive, actually a lot of positive feedback initially, because we want them to get that sort of positive feedback cycle where they are getting credit and excited and becoming part of the organization. We use a lot of sort of auxiliary tools, so we have our own Slack channel. And if you're a nonprofit, you can easily get a Slack membership, which is in a sense basically a chat online that allows them to have casual conversations with each other and decrease the amount of email sent back and forth. And then more importantly, as they start editing content, the experienced users, we encourage them who are mentoring them to help them navigate so that they begin to incorporate data into templates. So if we see that they duplicate equipment dosing for various diagnoses, we thank them for their edits, but say, hey, there's actually this great little template, and we'll give you a tutorial on how to do it. So-and-so is in your organization. He's going to help you. See if you can stop by his office and just say hi, and we'll get you involved so that we can keep all these information standardized. And we'll give some use cases to them as well. So we'll say, for instance, last year when the new guidelines were published, we were able to update every single guideline within 2 days because all of our information was siloed into various templates that can be embedded. And that really drives the point home because a lot of docs know how hard it is to keep up with information, and they appreciate the fact that it's sort of organized in a way that can allow for quick updates. So most importantly, templates will allow you to abstract the complexity. So the antibiotic templates are real easy because it's just a bunch of lists that are embedded within other lists that are put onto a main page. But when you start getting more, a little bit more complicated in terms of weight-based dosing, treating pediatric versus adult patients, there's a lot of nuances that go into what particular drug you're going to use or administer and what piece of equipment is going to be appropriate for that size patient. And so this is our critical care quick reference. This is what I alluded to earlier. So when a patient rolls into the emergency room and they are either a trauma patient or they're critically ill, if they're a child, we often stratify them based on their age. There's a lot of standardized ways that we stratify patients based on their age, but one of the ways is this Broslow coloring system. This is a quick way for nurses to put a big tape measure next to a kid. And based on how long they are, we know how much they weigh. We can also estimate how old they are, especially if they're not accompanied by a parent. And if they're very sick, a lot of times the ambulance will arrive without a parent. And what we were able to do is sort of generate this entire table very quickly by using just a few tools. And this table has allowed docs to then be able to reference this information within seconds and has reduced the amount of effort that a lot of the core editors have had to put into generating this. So what we have here is we just simply have a critical care main template. This thing is printed out as a result of some table code that's added onto the critical care template. And if you go to that bit.ly link, you'll be able to just go right to that page, and you can view the source if you want to see sort of what's going into it. But really, there are 3 things going on here. One, there's a template that keeps that information all contained so it can be embedded on multiple pages. 2, we've installed an extension called variables, and it's just exactly like it sounds. Variables are ways for you to have variables, so a word assigned to a number within a page, and parser functions which allow you to manipulate those variables so that you can perform weight-based calculations. And if you ever are performing any calculations or wish that you could do any math on your wiki to have derivative outputs from some sort of pre-specified input, then I would encourage you to use these tools. They're very easy and very well documented through the MediaWiki website. So then we're going to sort of jump down a little bit further so you can see exactly how this works. In order for us to generate these pages of content based on people's age, each page we just have to we do have to create a few pages. So we create all the basic age categories. We define the age, 8. We define a weight, 8 kilograms, an age. It's in a fractional percentage of years. And then we're just going to output the table. And the code is a little bit confusing, but all it's basically saying is, hey, if I'm less than this particular age, output a month date. Otherwise, just output a year date. So that just allows us to sort of get the basic sort of setup for a page. And this is going to allow us to make all of our calculations afterwards. So once we define variables within a page, we can perform all the weight-based calculations because that page knows how much that person's weight is supposed to be. And then after this sort of exists at the top of all these pages, so this is a little bit of manual labor. Everything afterwards is just derived automatically by defining these variables in this quick reference table. So now we've got a main page with a template within that page. And so what we do from here on out is we basically have two other tables of data that's going to get embedded into a page. So if you think about it, you have a big page, and you have sort of variables that are defined within that page. From that initial setup, you can pull in all the other information from other templates so that you are now basically taking all the data that a user would see and pulling them out into templates where you can just edit them once. So this long table of antibiotics that a physician is going to reference is all represented by a lot of stuff behind the scenes that the user doesn't ever have to see. And this is this table that is basically, you see a lot of error messages on it right now because it hasn't been incorporated into a usable page. But what it's doing is it's basically trying to perform calculations based on ages. And once this gets embedded in a page where an age has been defined, you get something nice like this, where it's taken weight-based dosing and it's basically combined it with the age that that page is specific for and given you all the information you could want. So we can create pages with hundreds of lists of medications in seconds only because we've abstracted all the calculations into a template and we've just defined the age within that template. So another interesting thing you can do is you'll see all these little brackets with variable defined. So if you ever want to perform any math on different parts of other parts of your wiki, not particular to a page, but you think there may be common variables across your wiki. So for example, a weight of a chemical is always, a volume always needs to be, concentration needs to be always a certain parts per million. You could define within a template on your wiki all of these standardized variables and insert them into any page that requires calculations so that all you need to do is change a variable in one location and it's going to change on every page within your wiki. So for example, when our emergency medicine associations release new guidelines that update the maximum dosing for a medication, we can change it in just one place in our wiki and set the max into all places that reference that. And so in a sense, we can take that guideline, which took 5 years to develop, and put it into practice for our clinicians in a minute. And then what will happen is our clinicians will then look at this data on their phone. They don't even need to know that the guideline's been published or any updates have taken place. All they need to know is that what they're looking at on their phone, if it's updated within the last day, is going to be current. And so if you want to sort of drill down to sort of what's happening here, in a sense, it's just saying, hey, this weight-based dosing of a medication is going to do a little bit of logic, and it's going to say, hey, if the weight's greater than the max, give me the max medication. Otherwise, output the weight-based dose. And these doses are all just defined in the dosing variables template, and that template just gets embedded in every page. So all we have to do is change a dose on that template, and every page that references it will have the exact template. And then as long as you declare a weight on that page, the calculation will take place. I've included this in here just if you really are interested. You can pull up the slides and the PDF handouts. And this is just a little bit of an enumeration of what's actually happening. But all it's basically saying is calculate a weight, round up to the most nearest decimal point, and output that weight. If the weight's greater than the max, just output the max weight and don't output that other weight. So we put a ceiling on what's outputted. And then otherwise, tell the user what's the weight-based dose. So nothing special. It takes a little bit of effort, but this effort invested will allow you to decrease duplication speed. So like we talked about, it increases the amount of speed that we're able to update changes on the website. It's standardized the sort of guideline implementation across the entire site and our mobile devices. And it's decreased the amount of duplication, so there's less error. And errors, when they're found, only need to be fixed in one place. So that's sort of the main talk. I can talk about other things that we do. We do a few other projects. We do some offline sync for our users who aren't at the bedside on a terminal computer. We have a mobile application development suite. We've implemented some institutional portals because a lot of institutions don't want their hospital-specific phone numbers, references on a public-facing wiki, so we work sometimes with hospitals to implement institutional-based wikis so that they can have private information federated plus our public information on their mobile devices. And then we've realized, this is when we've talked a lot about culture, is getting buy-in, that there's always going to be a subset, probably a large subset of wiki users who are not going to want to contribute. They're just there to consume. And as a public-facing wiki, we experience this more so, I think, than a lot of private wikis, where we have a large consumption base and a small editor base. And so I think it's important to target the areas where you think people are going to be most likely to contribute. So in our case, it's academic institutions, it's residents who are learning. They're going to be more likely to edit because they're actively learning, and this is a form of participatory learning. Community docs who are interested in just sort of going in, checking out, and going to the vacation home on the weekend are not going to be interested in participating with a wiki, but they should still get the benefit that we hope our wiki is providing for sort of standardization of knowledge. But we realize that our target audience is probably somewhat a little different than our consumptive audience. So I think that's also important within the organization, whether that's through targeting upper management first and allowing a trickle-down effect, or targeting a small sort of subgroup or like a little skunkworks project within your institution first, where there's a dedicated group, and allowing that information to then trickle out to sort of the more consumptive audience. And then lastly, you can easily Google these, but these are just some links. These will help you get started if you're using a MediaWiki install for templates. It's very easy, and it'll really save you a lot of grief if you start early on, rather than having to go back, which we initially did, being being inexperienced. We did have to redo a lot, putting them into templates. But now that they're there, they'll be there forever, and it'll make life a lot easier going forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions too.
Quick question. A lot of great work that's out there on the templates. You talk about buy-in. Have you seen, or do you have any usage statistics of how it's increased after you've done these templates, or what kind of usage are you actually getting from there?
So implementing templates themselves will not increase buy-in whatsoever. Increasing usefulness of access around a wiki is going to be your main way of increasing buy-in. There's a lot talked about rewards. Could you pay people to edit your wiki? Sure. Could you offer them rewards within the institution? Sure. But if you want to really create intrinsic value of your wiki, you need to, each time a user goes to the wiki, if they don't find what they need, or they spend more effort going to the wiki than going to their other sources, you're not going to increase any buy-in. So we found growth mainly by having mobile access to our wiki offline. That's how we contact our users. We give them push notifications. We encourage them to come back. And once they found that they've experienced usefulness accessing information, we found that they're more likely to contribute. Just by making fancy tools of organizing data and sort of talking about the technical aspect of making sure there's redundancy of backups and there's no duplication so you can have single point access. Those are all great from sort of the technical side, but your average user could care less. And if they don't have any sort of increased speed of accessing their, answering their question when they come to the service, they're not going to return. And they're sure as hell not going to actually want to edit. If it took them longer to find something just by searching, they're definitely going to want to put the effort in to edit. And another way that we've gotten buy-in from our users is through integrating highly into an educational curriculum, which sort of gives us a little bit, which is, I guess, an advantage for us, but maybe not an advantage for an enterprise, in that there's a sort of a level of participatory learning. So if you need to have continuing educational credits within your organization, or you need to have recertifications, making the wiki so it's a tool for learning is so that users are editing when they're recertifying or they're using it as a study tool. They're going to familiarize themselves with it, and they're going to be more likely to use it after they take their recert. And you also benefit from having them edit while they're actually trying to study and research. So that's one of the ways that we get a lot of buy-in on top of increasing the ability to access the data.
I'd just like to feed off some of the comments that you made there. You said the value, people get value when they find the content that they want. So my question's, when they don't find the content that they want, do you have a feedback loop or a mechanism to identify, this content is missing, and then how do you reach out to your existing contributors to try and, hey, does anybody have information on this content? Would you, consider putting an article together on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll never know the anonymous users that come to the site and don't find the content unless they just make an effort to reach out to us. We have a needed pages section off the front of our wiki where we allow users to just simply create links to non-created pages. And we have a newsletter. So how do we create continuing engagement? We have a newsletter that goes out every month highlighting great content from the wiki. So it gives a little bit of fame and fortune to people who have written those pages. We have authorship listings at the bottom, so it treats them like journal articles where there's first, second, third, fourth, 50th author. So there's also some notoriety that goes along with sort of editing pages. And then when users find pages or wish that they could link to a page but don't have the time to, they just simply do a dump of a needed page. They just add that page to the needed pages list, and that's the first place we encourage new members to go to. It's also sort of a place that we, within the editorial staff, are always looking at as well, so that we know what's needed on the wiki, and we're adding and removing pages from that list all the time.
So as a physician, I can understand both the effort that is required to put together something like this, as well as the usefulness of having this kind of a wiki, access to this kind of information. One of the challenges that I've come across when with similar kind of systems is completeness of information. How do you handle that?
Mm-hmm. So it's been a big issue. So there are pages that are not complete, and we fully recognize that, and I think it's going to be a continuous problem. In terms of correctness of information, we don't allow. The majority of our users are viewing this on a mobile phone. Most of them are not sitting down at a computer and viewing them on the web. So we don't allow non-approved and patrolled edits to be pushed out to mobile devices. So until it's been approved or patrolled by at least one prior editor of that page, no other end user will see that piece of information. In trying to encourage completeness, we don't remove pages from the needed pages list unless they're fully complete. How we encourage completeness is we have boilerplate templates. So if a new page is being created, there are pre-formatted sections. So if you're creating a diagnosis page, it's going to need to have a background. It's going to need to have a differential diagnosis. It's going to need to have physical exam features. It needs to have a treatment protocol. It needs to have consults, and it needs to have sort of other links to other useful pages that are related to it. It needs to be categorized for it to be viewed as complete. And all of those pre-specified categories are built into the template when they load that. So all those sections are already there. We can't encourage them or mandate them to be completed, but they're at least there to jog the person's memory and sort of their goal of creating and completing that page by seeing all of these blank areas that they've yet to fill in.
Anybody else got a question? One more.
This isn't necessarily about the wiki functionality in general, but just a curiosity question. So you're talking about people's health in this system, and it's open, open for anybody to be able to see. How do you get hospitals and doctors to buy into it, that the accuracy, they're making judgments on people's lives potentially? Some of these diagnoses, how did you get the buy-in from that? Or was there any legal disclaimers, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So we have a legal disclaimer that this is only for educational purposes. It's not, this is sort of the legal disclaimer. Yes, of course, people are using this to treat patients, but legally this is not for guiding patient treatment. Although, just like every source of medical information, you've never heard of anyone. Here's a good example. For textbooks, no one has ever sued a textbook manufacturer, and every 5 years there is incorrect information in a textbook that's updated. So we treat the wiki sort of from the same way in terms of our legal risk is very minimal. We have a disclaimer they have to agree to before using the mobile applications as well. From a buy-in perspective, we actually didn't try to get buy-in because it was too difficult. So we didn't ever approach hospital administrators. We didn't ever approach institutions initially because they are not the sort of target audience that we think are going to use a wiki as sort of early adopters. So what we did was we targeted young physicians who'd be enthusiastic about using something like this after growing up with Wikipedia, with social networks, with mobile applications, with electronic resources, and we targeted sort of the consumers first. So we targeted young physicians in residency programs who we thought would be, one, more likely to edit, and two, more likely to use it. And then as more and more people started using it, then the administrators started to take notice and ask if there was ways for them to utilize the technology to have institutional information on it. So we sort of went for some more of a grassroots approach rather than sort of higher up or sort of top-down approach.
Yeah, Dr. Dan, how about other languages in other countries? You must have other people finding it and looking at it and say, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
You know, can we get that?
Yeah, if we had probably a little bit more resources, more technical help, and some sort of reliable contacts that were multilingual, I think that would be. We have a sort of a roadmap that we have behind the scenes, and it's always on every yearly roadmap to sort of start rolling it out in Spanish first, and then advancing to other languages. Right now, we have a lot of users who just simply go to the wiki, and we can tell that they're using Google Translate to translate it. But yeah, it's definitely on our continuous roadmap to have a Spanish language first.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very
Cool,
much, Dan.
thanks, guys.